Welcome to Embracing Autism IRL. Today's episode is brought to you by SocialWise VR, an innovative platform helping autistic individuals develop essential social skills through immersive technology. I'm joined by Jenifer Shahin, a behavioral therapist and former film producer who has dedicated over 20 years to supporting neurodivergent individuals. Having overcome her own learning differences, Jenifer now empowers others through creative and technological approaches. Let's dive into how SocialWise VR is changing the game for social learning. Welcome, Jenifer.
Hi. Thanks for
Hi.
having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on the show. Can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what inspired your journey into supporting neurodiverse individuals?
Absolutely. I grew up in Los Angeles to immigrant parents. As a child, found myself often really struggling and navigating through simple day-to-day instruction in school or interactions. And as a result, I really had to be hyper creative in order to figure out what was going on. And it helped me in a way that I was able to relate better to others and used storytelling as a way to describe my feelings, but as if it was happening to others. So I was drawn to film very naturally, became a film producer, but always really liked helping people. And it was part of my academic studies was psychology and sociology. So I was approached by a cousin of mine who's a behavior therapist and said, I think you would be really good at this because we have a lot of children that are so creative and we want to use art to connect with them. And I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. and it turned out that it was a very organic experience for me. And in helping them, I was able to really connect with them through art, but also having a very structured approach through both my training, which was at the time ABA and ACT. And so I then thought as an older, more seasoned practitioner working with older adults that there's a problem here in the lack of modernized curriculum. And there's a lack of storytelling in therapy, and there is a lack of technology. And so I thought to marry my two loves, and I created SocialWise VR.
What I really like about this is that it also targets kind of a little bit older of a demographic than what is usually targeted for neurodivergent individuals. There's a lot of focus on like children, very young children, and there's not a whole lot of resources when it comes to that older teen, early 20s type of demographic. So this is unique in that sense because I haven't really seen a whole lot being done there. So speaking of kind of like those gaps, what do you see as the most significant gaps in skill training and support for autistic adolescents and young adults, particularly when it comes to navigating major life transitions?
Well, they definitely fall off a transition cliff, as we call it. So after they graduate high school, they have a lack of structured resources or programs. With that comes a lack of opportunity to practice. So coming off the back of the pandemic, especially, we encountered a lot of barriers around the opportunity to practice social skills. And we also now, as they are entering adulthood, can no longer go to the cinema with them, go to a party with them, go to the bowling alley. And so I felt like, okay, this is a huge gap in skill training, as you know, we're not practicing enough. There's not enough resources. And then furthermore, off the back end again of the pandemic, technology became a huge barrier. They were using it to escape the real world. And I thought to myself, this is a problem. We need to use technology to bring them back into the real world. So seeing these huge gaps for me was a serious problem. It was also, I found it to be a lack of autonomy in therapy. They're not getting to practice what really is triggering them or challenging them or preventing them from success. So all of these gaps combined made me more inspired to use these propositions when making SocialWise.
One of the things that kind of stood out because I looked at some of the video clip samples that you have on your website. My kids are now, they're very young, elementary aged, but they do have that social skills training that they do every day at school. And they went through a lot of social skills training with their speech therapist. And one of the gaps that I constantly ran into was I felt like there was a lot of very exaggerated expressions and things like that. And they were like acing it, right? So everyone's like, oh, yeah, they're doing great with being able to determine when someone's upset. But I was like, in real life, though, people aren't going to be this like cartoony, over exaggerated caricature reaction to everything you do and say. It's more subtle. And so I found that like through the videos that I was looking at on your website, it's a little more realistic onto like what those reactions would look like in real life. So I feel like that's something extra that you guys do that I haven't quite seen before. Did you guys do that intentionally or was that just kind of coincidental?
Well, it was so intentional. I feel like nuance is very difficult to teach. I also feel that from my experience with my learners that body language is not emphasized enough. And it's more so the more difficult body language that we do as humans, that is like crossing our arms. That really affects them, and how they perceive body language is different, and how we perceive it is different. And we're not even thinking about what our body is doing when we're speaking. So having a human component to SocialWise VR, I think, is what also makes it stand out, because with AI, we lose a lot of that. And also they lose the buy-in when they know that it's assimilated. They're like, oh, wait, you made this up. So when they see that they're actually talking to a human being, and the subtle nuances that we can point out during their immersive experience, it really increases the level of buy-in and trust. And it also helps them actually figure out what's happening in the room, being present and saying, oh, I sort of predicted that was the problem, but it's really the way this person is standing, or really the way their face is resting when they're speaking. So I feel that that is a huge contributor to the success that we're seeing in our sessions.
It's interesting that you mentioned the arm cross because that reminds me of like things that require contextual information that an autistic person might struggle with. Because, like, yeah, they could have their arms crossed because they're upset. But what if it's just cold outside? Like, they just need to know, like, the context of, oh, it's cold outside. They're just cold. So it's like so many layers that go into social communication that people who don't have that issue don't think about. But yeah,
It's
go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say it's common, and it's exciting for us in therapy, because even as a practitioner myself, I can only work on what they tell me they want to work on. But when we put them in the immersive experience with, like as you said, provides so much context, that the narrative changes in the room, and it's like, why is this person blinking all the time? Why is this person, And we're like, okay, let's pause and let's talk about it. So what you're saying is so relevant to what we're experiencing with them.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, like, what was your inspiration behind SocialWise VR? How does it work? And what role does it play in helping autistic individuals be able to kind of build that confidence and readiness for real world challenges?
Um, Again, I think my inspiration really was it really was that there was nothing modernized for adults. I really saw them struggle with the worksheets, struggle to generalize the role play. They were on their phones 24/7, and they were not only using social media, but using it sort of irresponsibly, because social media doesn't cater to our vulnerable users. They're not thinking about them, and they're just sort of out there in the Wild West, and anything can happen. And I was like, this has to change. So I thought to myself, the only way that we're going to create an experience where they can see possibilities that will help them make safer choices, reduce their anxiety, is to do something really immersive. I also know how much I struggled growing up, and how I really didn't have any idea of what to expect going into new situations. And after becoming a filmmaker, was like, wow, if I could have just had one possibility of what could happen, I probably would have handled that so much better. So going through all of these feelings with my learners at the time and having them talk to me saying, what if we did this? Like, it was such an inspiration. And I was like, we need to innovate. This needs to happen. This needs to happen now. So I was fully inspired by their excitement and then my own, childhood experience and wishing I had something like that. And I know now, even as someone who is not diagnosed, I still could benefit from seeing possible outcomes of new interactions or experiences. So I'm inspired to do it for myself as well.
I wanted to ask you, because we haven't actually gone into the details of what exactly SocialWise VR is. And so just to clarify for our audience listening or those of that out there watching, what exactly is SocialWise VR? Like what does it look like, feel like, what happens when you use it? Can you just kind of give a little breakdown?
Yes. So we refer to it as an on-demand social skill virtual reality application. And what it is it's a VR application on your headset. And how it works is our patients, we can meet on Zoom anywhere in the world at any time. And I will give them a code to put this over their head. And before we do that, we have a conversation about how their week is, what's coming up, what's bothering them, where's the anxiety, where's the fear. And I'll say, all right, how about we go into an immersive experience similar to that and see how it goes. And once they're in the experience, they get a 360-degree view of the location they're in. And it's a real location. It's not animated. And they will see a lot of action going on and we'll acclimatize them. We'll say, okay, let's talk about where's the exit in this bar? Do you know anyone here? Like, what do you want to make friends here? Like, let's look around. What's sticking out to you? After they acclimatize, they're presented with a challenge that's relevant to our conversation. And then the challenge will pause. It might ask them a question like, so do you come here often? Like a social or a small talk situation. And the screen will pause and they will have 3 choices in how they respond to that. And depending on how they respond, they're directed to those different outcomes. And then we talk about it. So it's like a choose your own adventure style learning. Not to age myself, but
No,
I
I
don't know
was
if you
just
know
gonna
choose your
say
own.
this is very familiar to like gamer nerds. Like I was a gamer nerd,
Okay.
so I'm like, oh, it's like those RPG games I used to play.
Yeah,
But that's
totally.
really cool because
Yeah.
like when you gamify it, I feel like it makes it less intimidating because if you were to take an autistic person out in the real world and just plop them at like a grocery store and say go, that's like way more intimidating. We actually did an episode a couple years ago where we were talking about gamification of therapy. So this kind of falls in line with that a bit and how for autistic people, it kind of provides a nice safety net so that you don't feel like if you fail, there's actual real life consequences. And I feel like because of that, it's kind of a more relaxed environment. Is that something that you guys were intentionally doing? Did you think about that at all throughout the process?
I think as practitioners, it's always in the forefront of our mind is safety. Without it, there's no trust, and without trust, there's no robust conversation, and then we can't help them. So them feeling safe and also adding the gamified element does increase their motivation to want to continue, even if they're not feeling great about it. I mentioned buy-in before. There's the buy-in is greater with human components in real locations, but they still know that they're safe and that this is controlled in a way. So it is one of the unique features that help them, feel that they can go through the experience and know it'll be okay.
So it sounds like you're doing this with clients in like is it a clinical setting?
Yes, so we work both in right now in a high school. So my co-founder is the director of a high school for exceptional students in Pittsburgh, and we also work with a few private clinics at the moment. We're kind of running a lot of different trials, and we're starting to get really positive early day data and proof points. So I wanted to do that before, just came in hot, with this. So, and it was more so now I feel like we need to accelerate it. We have really good data, really great proof points. But as I said, safety in therapy is one thing, safety in the real world is another. And I'm finding more and more situations with our adult learners that they're finding themselves that are really, really unsafe. And so I feel like the urgency to move on this and get them equipped with being able to make better choices.
Could you talk a little bit about what some of those challenges are? So you mentioned some safety issues and how this helps kind of equip them for it. What are some of those scenarios that either the parents of these kids or young adults are bringing up, or maybe the young adults or older adults are kind of bringing into these sessions?
Definitely. A lot of it is coercion with our adult females, not understanding that they can say no on the third offer of a drink, or staying long when they want to leave the room and somebody manipulating them to stay longer. It's also being taken advantage of online by catfishes that take their money, unfortunately, or Uber drivers that try to convince them to pay cash instead. Just these little things that we can't predict as carers and we can't predict as parents that are coming into my office and scare me, and it's happening more and more. And so I'm teaching them with our safety. We just built this new range of safety scenarios around manipulation, gaslighting, coercion, specifically because it has outweighed the what we're used to dealing with, like a first date or or TSA or a job interview. It's all now becoming safety. So so these are a few examples of what we're seeing and why we created these scenarios, and then we equip them with advocacy skills and how to read these small nuances. It's very difficult when somebody says, "Come on, have another. It's okay, have another. Please have another." Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And then like the challenge I feel like with autism is kind of there's the first being able to understand the social cues, but then you're taught your whole life that you have to be like very polite and this and that. And a lot of times in my experience, for me, because I'm autistic as well, my struggle has always been like I come off too rude, I come off too blunt. And so you go through all this work to try to be polite and all this, but then you're put in a situation like that where you're like, wait, they're being nice, they're offering something. I've been told that it's rude to say no, or I've been told that it's rude to. So then you get like an extra layer of nuance after you went through all this therapy to teach you to do that thing. So I feel like this is a good way of giving them, again, like a safe practice where they can bring up these questions without actually having any sort of real life danger, basically. I did have a question for you in terms of the experience. So, how do you kind of handle, or how does SocialWise VR handle very specific scenarios that a client might come up with, or like a person who's using this? Is it that you guys have like a really large library of built-in scenarios? Are they customized? How does that work?
we have a pretty decent library at the moment, which we're building on. But what's cool about SocialWise is that it's not prescribed. So a lot of the scenarios are relevant to a lot of the fears that we're dealing with. So, for example, if they struggle with authority, airport security would work. If they're struggling, we have a lot of workplace scenarios. So if they're struggling with, let's say, rejection from coworkers, we have that, or just receiving feedback from a supervisor, we have that. But there are other challenges that can apply to that as well. So we made it very malleable in that sense.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because workplace is definitely an area that I've personally struggled with a ton. I mean, it's been pretty bad. Like I've gone through like workplace discrimination and everything. And it's, I think, a hard one to tackle because a lot of companies, they basically claim that they're like neuroaffirming and stuff, but once you're in there, they're really not. And I think the hardest part is that as an autistic person, you take things very literally and at face value. So if your company says that there's a company policy that says you can be open and honest about X, Y, and Z, we have open door policy. I feel like a lot of autistics take that black and white, literal, face value, but then you get in trouble if you're actually honest and open. And so I was just thinking about how your virtual reality could kind of help with like the nuance in that sort of like navigating the social side of work. Is there any particular scenarios, like you mentioned, talking to your boss? What are the scenarios that it really kind of drills down on in relation to more of like the social stuff?
So we have some challenges that address, again, accepting feedback from your supervisor, how to handle it. And remember, I said there's different choices that they can make. And when those choices lead to those outcomes, it really improves the discussion. Like what you said, hey, the rule said this, but, so we talk about how to address that and why it's important to address it, and maybe even how to ask good questions around it. If you're confused, it's okay. You don't have to mask all day long. You don't have to social fake all day long. Just ask questions. Say, like, I'm receiving it this way. How, and we put that as some of the options, is asking a question just to see what the answer could be. Or it could be that, you don't like to share. There's a lot of co-working situations, and they don't want to share in the office sometimes, or they don't want people just coming to their desk, fair enough, and picking up a marker. So nothing I would have predicted, but we made this a scenario because it's important to talk about what does it mean to now work with other people and share the space and that kind of boundary and respect. So what we do is we talk about advocacy in the workplace, because we know, for example, that that's mostly absent, even though they say that it's there, and that it's great to, ask questions and also talk to your supervisor about how you like to be spoken to, how you want to be communicated to, and how you understand the rules to be, so to even avoid getting to that point. And then we see if they want to play it over and over again and try these different outcomes and what works best for them. So we have so many workplace scenarios. We also have, dealing with body language from your supervisor, dealing with body language from your colleagues, explaining your own body language to them. We also have another one around going to lunch, how you want to enter social circles at work. So there's quite a few, and we're building more and more as we go along. So it's exciting.
I feel like I could have benefited from this. You mentioned going to lunch, and I just remember going to lunch at work, and I was like so nervous. I don't know why. And I would always just order whatever everyone next to me was ordering because I didn't want to stand out.
Oh no.
Yeah.
You're like, I hate this burrito.
Yeah. I'm like, but I'm eating it because everyone else ordered it.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It happens.
So,
it happens.
yeah, it's just like a weird social pressure that like when you're autistic, you're just like, you don't know what to do and you just kind of panic. So what is it, or how is it that SocialWise ensures that it's integrating effectively with traditional human interaction to teach these critical social and life skills?
Well, firstly, again, we use human components, which I think is really, really what makes it effective and transformative. Technology, the lack of actual human beings, I think, is the barrier of the connection that's not happening when they're using any kind of, let's say, animation or VR to learn new skills. I think it also adds to the relevancy, is that we're working with real people. And then on top of that, we incorporate our learners' questions, feedbacks, experiences. They're a huge part of the technology. They contribute a lot to this, to the curriculum itself. And I find that is what's missing in our everyday prescribed therapies. So it's exciting that we're in the times that we're in, because we can do that. I can now have these great forums with them, and they can just even use their computer to give me the feedback. And that's why we're probably having some nice outcomes. It's not for everybody, and I'm not saying that it is, but for those that love the learners that love technology, want to try something new, want to be successful at work, are socially motivated, they relate. And I think it's because it comes from them as well.
So I also wanted to ask you, when it comes to these like scenarios, how long of a scenario is it? Like, is it a certain amount of time? Is it like a whole scenario, or is it kind of like they pop in and pop out like you would with like an online game or something? Like, how exactly does that work when they kind of go in to experience this and then come out of it?
They're not that long. So the acclimatization is from 30 seconds to a minute. And then after that, they go into the challenge, which is anywhere from only like 12 seconds to 40 seconds, depending on the challenge. And then the outcomes are each about like, 20, 30 seconds, 20, 30, some are a little longer. They variate. And that's because it is really immersive. And it takes like, I don't want that, I don't. And after about even, let's say 10 seconds, we're getting a lot of feedback from them in which we want to pause and say, okay, let's talk about this. So there's a lot happening in so little time that we felt the shorter, the better.
Yeah, I
So
feel like that's particularly good with the ADHDers, like my kids. I don't know if they could do
yeah,
long scenarios.
we used to call it. Remember when that was branded the MTV generation?
Oh yeah.
So
Well, we're dating ourselves a bit here.
I know, I know, I keep doing that, but I was like, but I always think going back and thinking about that and go, no, my friend, that was just, that was, we can't maintain attention. So yeah, it is good for them. We do have, just so you know, we have what's called the dinner exercise, and where we like flip the script a little and we allow neurotypicals to enter and see what it's like to be in their situation. These last a bit longer. And also in the dinner scenario, it's for we hired neurotypical actors actually to come in, and neurodivergent. We actually hired all kinds of actors to come into the dinner scene, have a conversation so that our learners can say how they respond to some conflict at the table. And they may say, like, the person who is over talking maybe and interrupting or whatever, they're like, I like that guy. And we're like, okay, but do you see how maybe the flow of the discussion is a little bit, isn't working? So let's talk about why that is, and it goes into so many amazing directions. I wish you could sit in on one of them. You should get in an experience and tell me
That is
what you think.
pretty.
I love it.
Actually, like as you mentioned that, I was like, in the future, having kind of like the inverse would be helpful too, where you can stick neurotypical people in all these experiences and then just kind of help them understand a little more, like empathetically, like what it feels like to be autistic, like having a reverse
Mm-hmm.
scenario, like an empathy
Mm-hmm.
scenario. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah,
um,
we just started those because exactly what you said is what we were seeing. People were saying, can we reverse it? Like, especially corporations, can we reverse it? Because they have no idea. They have no idea what it's like. They're not doing the training. They're not spending enough time with them. And it's been a game changer. And I think moving forward, we're going to have more of those.
Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you, like, how do people get started with this? Like, I guess it's going to be a little bit different depending on whether it's an individual who wants to use it for themselves or if it's like a school or an organization who wants to use it for like training purposes, like you mentioned. How would one kind of start that process?
So they would go on our website and reach out to us. They can subscribe to it. It comes with a guide. Remember, it's not a total prescribed approach, but you do have to be a professional to use it. Up until now, we're now creating a certification program so parents can use it. They can go through our training, they can get certified, and they can start using it themselves. But for right now, if you are a paraprofessional, you're a teacher, a therapist, a coach, you can subscribe to SocialWise VR via our website. And you would have a guideline and instructional, and we make it pretty easy, but we don't know your patients or your students, so we rely on you to tailor it. And having the certification now is really going to improve that, I think, too, and monitor that. It's going to open the doors to parents now, so we're excited about that.
So if you're a parent who's listening and you have zero familiarity with virtual reality, is there some sort of like upfront something that they have to be able to use it or access it? Are there any particular like a list of tools or anything that they need? What would they have to do in order to be able to be like, okay, ready to go. All I got to do is turn it on now.
Right. So at this stage, they would need a MetaQuest headset, but we are expanding into other platforms, but that will be in another 6 months from now. But we right now operate on a MetaQuest, and they would need Windows 10 plus if they want to be in the experience with their child. So those would be the two hardware materials needed, and then they would just need to be familiar with some of these topics, that we're addressing. And if they're not, we would encourage guidance. We do have an instructional on how to use a VR headset, how to download the app, how to download also the software to your computer. Everything's done in it's very streamlined for them because we know we're heading that direction. so that's sort of how they would access it and what they'd need.
And you mentioned about being prepared for the conversation side of things. Why do you feel like it's important for parents to really have these open conversations with their autistic children, particularly during any life transitions or anything like that?
I think there's a lot of guesswork going on with parents and their kids. And so I think it's important to actually, sometimes it's very difficult. I realize that, to tap in with these conversations, because even typical children don't want to have them with their parents. But the more you talk to them and the more you practice that conversation and the more you normalize it, the more open they will become and the more you will know and not guess what the problem is. And I also think that they forget again that, they're getting a lot of information from technology, from the internet, from friends at university, friends at work. They're getting gifts that are or GIFs that are highly sexualized, or don't really know how to respond to that because this conversation didn't happen at home prior. So all of their education starts in the home, and it continues that way. Just because they turn 17, 18, 19, 20, that shouldn't change, because you're still someone that is teaching them throughout their life. So normalize the conversation. Don't be afraid of it, and ask as many questions as possible. And there's guidance for that too. I do encourage parents to look on forums, go online, talk to their own, GP or counselor to have
Yeah.
those conversations.
Yeah, definitely keeping that line of communication open because you never know what your kid is exposed to. And nowadays, I feel like it's a lot.
It's a lot. It is. It's a lot for me. I mean,
Yeah.
well, I didn't ask for this. I'll get
Yeah.
sometimes. So I didn't need to know that. It's a lot of
Yeah. It comes to you now.
I
Yeah.
know. So it's happening to them too, and we're helping them navigate that. But as much as they could do that at home as well would really help. Would really help.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up, I want to ask you something that I ask everybody. Our podcast is called Embracing Autism. It means something a little bit different for every person that I ask. So to you personally, what does the phrase or the idea of embracing autism mean to you?
For me, it's really awareness and education, and again, normalizing conversations with anyone that you encounter that may have a diagnosis. It's curiosity, it's lack of judgment, it's lack of fear. It's all of these really important words that we are not making important anymore. So I always tell, even though I struggled growing up, I still have a much easier time navigating. And I tell so many of my friends, why aren't we talking about autism? Why am I only having these conversations with my therapeutic colleagues or, my learners? Have you heard anything about it lately? Are we talking? So I think that it's also those of us who are aware of it, making others aware of it who are not exposed to autism, and making that a conversation as much as everything else is, as much as what how was your weekend was. For me, that's what embracing autism means.
I feel like that's so true because I know that at the beginning of our journey, half of our family, like extended family, had never really even heard of autism, or if they did, there was like a really vague idea of what it was. I was kind of surprised
Yeah.
how little people knew about it until it became part of our family, like a discussion in our
Yeah.
family. So yeah. So for our listeners out there and our viewers out there, can you tell us where they can learn more about SocialWise or how they can get involved?
Absolutely. You can visit our website at www.socialwisevr.com. You can find us on Instagram. Our handle is SocialWiseVR, and we're also on LinkedIn as SocialWiseVR. And also, you can find me, Jenifer Shahin, on LinkedIn, and you can ask me anything you want directly. I am so fun to chat with. So if you have any questions or you want to know more, feel free to go to our website or just come to me.
Yeah, and yeah, she is fun to chat with. I will vouch for that one. I can say that. So
Yes. Thank you. You too, Leah. You too.
thank you so much. So yeah, Jennifer's work with SocialWise VR is really inspiring. I think this is something that's going to help out a lot of people, especially those teenage years where the social part really does ramp up and there's more peer pressure happening at that time. So for those of you out there listening or watching, if you'd like to learn more about how this platform is helping neurodivergent and autistic individuals develop social skills, do as she says and visit socialwisevr.com. You won't regret it. And a big thank you to SocialWise VR for sponsoring this episode and supporting the autistic community. Thank you so much, Jenifer.
Thank you. It's been so much fun today.
Absolutely. You have a good one.
Yeah. You as well. Bye.
Bye.